I stared at my phone in disbelief, the banking app glowing accusingly in the darkness of my Seattle hotel room. $0.37. Just yesterday, there had been $87,423 in our emergency fund. Money we'd saved for over 8 years, money that represented countless overtime shifts, deferred vacations, and careful budgeting. Now, gone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The notification had come while I was in the middle of a crucial product launch meeting. My team had just successfully deployed the software update we'd been developing. For months, everyone was celebrating. I excused myself to the restroom, planning to check if our automatic mortgage payment had gone through. Instead, I discovered financial apocalypse. 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed with an email. The subject line, "Moving forward separately." The sender, Jennifer Thompson, my wife of 11 years. The email was brief, almost businesslike. She'd filed for divorce that morning. She was claiming her fair share of our assets after years of emotional neglect. She hoped we could handle this maturely. The entire message was 5 sentences long, ending with, "I've already moved my things out. The house is yours until we settle." I read it twice, 3 times, searching for some hint of the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman who'd promised to stand by me through anything. There was nothing of her in those cold, detached words. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Then I did something that would have surprised Jen if she'd seen it. I smiled. Because what Jen didn't know, what she had never bothered to ask about during our marriage, was that I had prepared for this possibility long ago. My name is Michael Thompson. I'm 39 years old and a cybersecurity specialist for a major tech company based in Portland, with frequent travel to our Seattle offices. And this is the story of how my wife's betrayal led to the most unexpected chapter of my life. I met Jennifer Casey at a tech conference in 2012. I was there presenting a paper on emerging security protocols. She was representing her marketing firm that specialized in tech clients. She approached me after my presentation with thoughtful questions and a dazzling smile. We exchanged business cards, and by the end of the conference weekend, we'd had 3 dinners together. Jen was brilliant, ambitious, and seemed to understand the demands of my career in a way no one else ever had. 6 months later, we were engaged. By our first anniversary, we'd purchased a craftsman-style house in the West Hills neighborhood of Portland, with views of Mount Hood on clear days. The first 5 years were good, at least that's what I tell myself now. Jen continued climbing the ranks at her marketing firm, while I established myself as an authority in my field. We traveled when we could, renovated our home room by room, and talked about starting a family someday. But my career was taking off in ways neither of us had anticipated. I was increasingly requested for consulting projects that required travel. The money was exceptional. My income nearly tripled in 3 years, but the time away from home grew longer. Jen seemed supportive, proud even. "We're building something together," she would say. "This sacrifice now means freedom later." So, we continued, thinking we were on the same page. We opened joint accounts, set up automatic transfers to our emergency fund and retirement accounts, and created a detailed 5-year plan that would allow me to scale back travel by the time we hit our late 30s, just in time to start that family we kept putting off. What I didn't realize was that while I was focused on our future, Jen was mentally checking out of our present. The changes were subtle at first. Phone calls during my trips grew shorter. Her social media posts rarely mentioned me. New friends appeared whose names I didn't recognize. Shopping bags from stores we couldn't afford started appearing in the closet, but still I trusted her. I believed in us. Then came the conference in Tokyo 3 years ago. I called her from my hotel room, exhausted after a 16-hour flight, and a day of meetings. She didn't pick up. I texted, nothing. Finally, at what would have been 3 a.m. in Portland, she responded with a brief message. Sorry, was out with friends. Talk tomorrow? Something in my gut tightened. I opened our shared credit card app and saw a $347 charge from an upscale restaurant in Portland from just 2 hours earlier. At 1 a.m. on a Tuesday. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I immediately assumed infidelity, though that thought certainly crossed my mind, but because it was the first concrete evidence that Jen was living a life separate from our shared vision. A life she didn't feel the need to discuss with me. When I returned home 4 days later, I didn't confront her. Instead, I watched. I listened. I paid attention to the gaps in her stories, the vague references to work events that never appeared. On her company's social feeds, the sudden password changes on her devices. Still, I said nothing, not because I'm a pushover, but because I've always believed in verifying before accusing, in gathering intelligence before making a move. My work in cybersecurity had taught me that knee-jerk reactions rarely lead to optimal outcomes. So instead of confronting, I protected. I didn't hack her accounts or hire a private investigator. I still had some boundaries I wouldn't cross. But I did begin to quietly secure our shared future, just in case my suspicions proved correct. First, I opened a separate account at an international bank with a branch in Portland. Then, during a legitimate business trip to the Cayman Islands, for a security audit of an offshore banking system, I established a private account. Both were completely legal, properly reported on tax forms, and, most importantly, unknown to Jen, who had never shown interest in our financial paperwork. Over the next 2 years, I gradually transferred portions of my consulting fee bonuses to these accounts. Not enough to raise eyebrows, not enough to shortchange our joint goals, but enough to ensure I wouldn't be left with nothing if my marriage collapsed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I also secured digital copies of all our important documents: marriage certificate, property deeds, investment statements, tax returns. I stored them both in encrypted cloud storage and on a secure physical drive kept in my office lockbox. Again, not because I was planning for divorce, but because redundant security is second nature in my line of work. During this time, Jen and I continued our outward routine: dinners with friends, holiday gatherings with family, occasional vacations when our schedules aligned. But there was a growing distance between us, an unspoken tension that neither of us addressed directly. I suggested couples therapy twice. Both times, Jen dismissed the idea. "We don't need someone else in our business," she said the first time. "We're just busy, it's a phase," she said the second time. I didn't push further. Perhaps that was my mistake. Last spring, I was offered a major contract to overhaul the security protocols for a multinational corporation. The project would require 3 months of intensive work, including 6 weeks on site at their headquarters in Seattle. The compensation was substantial, enough to potentially move up our 5-year plan by 18 months. Jen seemed enthusiastic when I told her. "You should absolutely take it," she said, squeezing my hand across the dinner table. "I've got some big projects at work too, so the timing is actually perfect." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. The project began in July. I rented a corporate apartment in Seattle, returning to Portland every other weekend when possible. Jen and I texted daily, though her responses grew increasingly delayed and brief as the weeks passed. I attributed it to her own busy schedule, to the natural strain of distance. During my 5th week in Seattle, I returned home unexpectedly on a Wednesday night, hoping to surprise Jen. The house was empty, but there were signs of recent use. 2 wine glasses in the sink, a throw blanket rumpled on the couch, a cologne scent that wasn't mine lingering in the air. I sat in our darkened living room for an hour, waiting. She never came home. At midnight, I texted her, just checking you're okay. 3 minutes later, at Christine's for girls' night, staying over, thought you were in Seattle. I didn't respond. There was no point. Christine was her college friend who'd moved to San Francisco 3 years earlier. I knew because we'd attended her going-away party. I returned to Seattle the next morning without seeing Jen, without leaving any sign I'd been home. Instead, I accelerated my contingency planning. I moved additional funds to my offshore account. I documented the state of our joint accounts. I contacted my old friend David Rodriguez, who had transitioned from tech security to legal practice, specializing in digital assets, and scheduled a consultation for the following week. Just preliminary advice, I told him over a secure line, just in case. David's expression was grim when I finished explaining my situation. I've seen this pattern before, Mike. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but you need to protect yourself, especially your intellectual property and future income streams. Over the next 2 weeks, I did exactly that. I secured my patents, reviewed the terms of my residual income from previous security systems I designed, and ensured my current contract specified that all future royalties were individual intellectual property, not marital assets. I didn't do this out of greed or vindictiveness. I did it because I'd spent 15 years building expertise and reputation in my field. I couldn't control whether my marriage survived, but I could control the security of my life's work. The project in Seattle concluded successfully in late September. I returned to Portland expecting, though not looking forward to, a difficult conversation with Jen. Instead, I found a half-empty house and a note on the kitchen counter. Michael, I need some space to think. Staying at a friend's for a while. We'll talk soon. Jay. I nodded to myself, a strange calm settling over me. The certainty of knowing finally was almost a relief after months of suspicion and doubt. I spent that weekend taking inventory of what was missing. Her clothes, her grandmother's silver, the small Rothko print we'd purchased on our 5th anniversary, miscellaneous kitchenware. I changed the security system codes and installed additional cameras, both inside and outside the house, not out of paranoia, but out of prudence. On Monday morning, I went to our joint bank and investment accounts and discovered that while I'd been securing my future income, Jen had been quietly liquidating our present assets. Over the previous month, she'd withdrawn nearly $30,000 from our checking account in increments, just below the amount that would trigger automatic notifications. She'd also sold shares from our joint investment account, again, in amounts small enough to avoid immediate detection. But she hadn't touched the emergency fund. Yet. I immediately called our investment manager, Sarah Chen, and explained the situation. Sarah, who had handled our accounts for years, was professionally sympathetic but clear. Without a court order, she couldn't prevent Jen from accessing joint assets. The best I can do is set up alerts for any activity, she offered, and suggest you talk to a lawyer about freezing accounts if you're concerned. I thanked her and scheduled an appointment with a divorce attorney for the following day, but I already suspected I was too late to prevent what would happen next. That evening, as I was reviewing security footage from our home cameras, my phone buzzed with the banking notification. Emergency fund transfer initiated, 87,423, 000. Destination, unknown external account. I made one call, to David, then shut off my phone and went to bed. There was nothing more to do tonight. The pieces were already in motion. The next morning, I woke to 3 missed calls from Jen and the email that began this story. I read it, allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to feel the anger and sense of betrayal, then opened my laptop and began executing the response plan I'd developed with David. First, I filed a formal fraud report with the bank regarding the emergency fund transfer, noting that while Jen had legal access to the account, the transfer had been made under suspicious circumstances and requesting a temporary freeze pending investigation. Next, I sent a brief, factual email to Jen's parents with whom I'd always had a good relationship. I explained that Jen and I were separating, that there were financial irregularities I was legally obligated to address, and that while I wasn't asking them to take sides, I wanted them to hear directly from me before rumors began. Then I contacted our home insurance company to update them that Jen was no longer residing in the house, ensuring any future claims couldn't be complicated by questions of occupancy. Finally, I called the attorney David had recommended, forwarded all relevant documentation, and scheduled an in-person consultation for that afternoon. Throughout all of this, I maintained a calm I wouldn't have thought possible even months earlier. The pain was there, certainly. The end of an 11-year relationship couldn't be anything but painful, but it was contained, managed. I operated with the same methodical precision I brought to securing vulnerable systems. Identify the breach, mitigate damage, prevent further exploitation, rebuild with better protections. 3 days passed before Jen called. Instead of texting, I let it go to voicemail. "Michael, this is ridiculous. The bank has frozen the transfer. I'm entitled to half of our assets. You know that. We need to talk like adults about this. Call me back." I didn't. Instead, I forwarded the voicemail to my attorney, along with documentation of all withdrawals and sales Jen had made over the previous 3 months. Together, they painted a clear picture of systematic asset depletion well beyond half our assets. On my attorney's advice, I filed for divorce the following week, citing irreconcilable differences. The filing included detailed financial disclosures of all domestic accounts and assets, but not significantly my Cayman Islands account, which was protected by specific legal structures that would become relevant only under certain circumstances. Those circumstances arrived sooner than expected. 10 days after receiving my divorce filing, Jen's attorney submitted a discovery request demanding complete financial disclosure, including any and all international accounts, cryptocurrency holdings, or other assets not previously documented. My attorney called immediately. "They know something," she said, "or they're fishing. Either way, we need to discuss strategy." We met that evening at her office. "Here's the situation," she explained. "We're legally required to disclose all assets in a divorce proceeding. Failing to do so could result in penalties far beyond the value of the hidden assets." I nodded. "I understand. But the Cayman account was established legally with income that was properly reported on tax returns. It's not hidden in the sense of being illegal." "No, but withholding it from divorce proceedings would be problematic," she countered. "However, there's another approach. The account was established during your marriage, using income earned during your marriage, which typically makes it marital property. But the Thompsons versus Blakely precedent established that when one spouse systematically depletes marital assets prior to divorce filing, the court may allow the other spouse to retain separate assets as compensation." She smiled. "In other words, we disclose the account, but argue you should retain it entirely due to her prior actions, and we have documentation of those actions." The strategy was sound, legally and ethically. We proceeded accordingly. What we didn't anticipate was Jen's response. 2 days after we submitted our disclosure, including detailed documentation of the Cayman account and the legal argument for why it should remain solely mine, I received a text from an unknown number. "Coffee? We need to talk. No lawyers. Tyler Wilson." The name had appeared in my attorney's initial investigation. A sales executive Jen had met through work approximately 9 months earlier. The timing aligned perfectly with the beginning of her late nights at the office and girls' trips. I showed the text to David, who happened to be at my house reviewing some technical aspects of my intellectual property documentation. "You're not seriously considering meeting him?" David asked incredulously. I shrugged. I'm curious what he thinks there is to discuss. It's a trap, David insisted. They want something off record they can use against you later. Or, I countered, they've realized they miscalculated and want to negotiate directly. David sighed, recognizing my tone. At least meet somewhere public. And don't agree to anything without consulting your attorney. The next day I sat at a corner table in a busy downtown coffee shop, watching Tyler Wilson approach. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the polished good looks of someone who'd made a career of first impressions. He carried himself with a confidence that probably served him well in sales, but read as arrogance in this context. "Michael," he said, extending his hand, "thank you for meeting me." I shook his hand briefly. "What did you want to discuss, Tyler?" He sat down, glancing around before leaning forward. "This situation with Jennifer has gotten out of hand. I think we can resolve it more efficiently, without lawyers bleeding everyone dry." "Everyone isn't being bled," I replied calmly. "My attorney's fees are quite reasonable given the complexity," Jen introduced. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Look, I care about Jennifer. I want what's best for her. This offshore account situation, it's causing her significant distress. I imagine the discovery that her plan to leave her husband financially vulnerable has backfired would be distressing," I said, maintaining eye contact. Tyler's expression hardened slightly. She was protecting herself. Your constant traveling, your emotional distance, she felt abandoned years ago. And yet she never suggested counseling, never indicated she was unhappy enough to leave, and only protected herself by systematically depleting joint assets while I was away on a work project she enthusiastically encouraged me to take. Kept my voice even, factual. Those aren't the actions of someone who felt abandoned. Those are the actions of someone executing a plan. Tyler shifted in his seat. Regardless of how we interpret past events, we're here now. Jennifer is willing to drop her claim to the Cayman account if you'll agree to a 50-50 split of all domestic assets and property. I allowed myself a small smile. "Tyler, let me be clear. The only reason we're having this conversation is because you and Jen have realized your initial strategy has failed. The documentation we've submitted demonstrates a clear pattern of financial misconduct on Jen's part. My attorney is confident, and the precedent support, that I'll be awarded the offshore account plus compensation for the assets Jen has already liquidated." I leaned forward slightly. "But I'm not vindictive. I'm willing to accept a settlement where Jen keeps what she's already taken. I keep the Cayman account and the house, and we split the remaining liquid assets evenly. No alimony either way." Tyler stared at me, clearly not having expected a counter-offer. "I'll need to discuss this with Jennifer and her attorney." "Of course," I replied, standing. "They have my attorney's contact information. Enjoy your coffee." As I walked out, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction in having outmaneuvered them. Only a weary acceptance that this chapter of my life was ending, not as I'd once hoped, but at least on terms I could live with. 3 weeks later, we signed the settlement agreement, almost exactly as I'd outlined to Tyler. Jen kept the approximately $128,000 she'd already withdrawn or liquidated. I kept the house, worth $850,000, with about $300,000 remaining on the mortgage, and the Cayman account, just under $400,000 at that point. We split the remaining investment accounts and retirement funds, which came to about $215,000 each, after accounting for penalties and taxes. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. I never saw Jen in person throughout the entire process. All communication went through attorneys after that coffee meeting with Tyler. I sold the house 6 months after that. Too many memories, too much wasted potential in those walls. I purchased a modern condo in Portland's Pearl District and a small cabin on the Oregon coast near Cannon Beach, splitting my time between the urban convenience of the city and the restorative solitude of the ocean. I continued my consulting work, but became more selective about projects, prioritizing interesting problems over maximum compensation. I started teaching part-time at Portland State University, sharing my expertise with the next generation of cybersecurity specialists. I adopted a rescue dog, a three-legged Australian shepherd mix named Data, who accompanies me to the beach house and has somehow become my most effective social connection, introducing me to neighbors and fellow dog walkers. As for Jen, I heard through mutual friends that she and Tyler moved to Los Angeles about a year after our divorce. The marketing firm she worked for closed its Portland office, and she transferred to their California branch. Tyler found a position with a competing firm. They bought a house in the Hollywood Hills, significantly more expensive than our Portland home had been. 8 months ago, I received an unexpected email from Christine, Jen's college friend, who supposedly had moved to San Francisco. The subject line read simply, "You should know." The message was brief but impactful. Tyler had been having an affair with one of his clients. Jen had discovered it when she surprised him during a business trip to San Diego. According to Christine, Jen was devastated, having believed Tyler was different and truly committed. I sat with that information for a long time, trying to identify what I felt. Not schadenfreude. I took no pleasure in Jen's pain, despite everything. Not vindication, exactly, though there was, perhaps, a grim satisfaction in the pattern repeating itself. Mostly, I felt a profound sense of distance, as if I were reading about characters in a novel rather than people who had once been central to my life. I never responded to Christine's email. There was nothing to say that wouldn't have sounded either bitter or patronizing. Instead, I took Data for a long walk on the beach, watching him navigate the shore confidently despite his missing leg, adapting to his circumstances with a resilience I continued to learn from. Last month, I received a package at my Portland address, forwarded from the old house through a service I'd set up during the move. Inside was a small wooden box I recognized immediately, a handcrafted jewelry box I'd given Jen on our 5th anniversary. With it was a handwritten note. "Michael, I found this while packing and thought you should have it back. I'm moving again, alone this time. I've been doing a lot of thinking about the choices I've made and the person I've become. I won't ask for forgiveness because I haven't earned it, but I want you to know I recognize now what I threw away, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I hope you found happiness. You deserve it. Jennifer." Inside the box was my grandmother's ring, the one I'd given Jen when I proposed, the one she'd taken during her initial move-out, but hadn't included in the divorce inventory. I'd never asked about it, assuming she'd sold it long ago. I set the ring on my desk, where it still sits today as I record this. Not because I harbor any lingering attachment to Jen or our failed marriage, but as a reminder of both what can be lost through betrayal and what can be saved through preparation and principle. The emergency fund Jen emptied was substantial, but it was never my only resource. The offshore account she never knew about wasn't just about money. It represented a fundamental truth about relationships. Trust is essential, but self-protection is prudent. You can love someone completely while still maintaining healthy boundaries and safeguards. That's the lesson I carry forward as I continue rebuilding my life. Not cynicism, but clear-eyed caution. Not isolation, but selective vulnerability. Not fear of connection, but respect for the necessity of personal security, emotional, financial, and otherwise. Because in the end, the most reliable emergency fund isn't the one in your bank account. It's the resilience you build within yourself. The community you cultivate around you, and the wisdom to know that while not every relationship lasts forever, your capacity to begin again remains undiminished. As for that ring, I'm thinking of having it reset into something new, perhaps a pendant for my sister's upcoming birthday. Because sometimes the best way to honor the past isn't to preserve it unchanged, but to transform it into something that better serves the future we're creating. The days after discovering the emptied emergency fund and receiving Jennifer's email passed in a blur of focused activity. I functioned on autopilot, my emotions locked away behind the same mental firewalls I used when handling security breaches. For clients, in cybersecurity, panic is the enemy of clear thinking. The same principle applied here. I gave myself designated periods to feel the anger, the betrayal, the grief, 20 minutes in the morning shower, 30 minutes before sleep. But otherwise, I compartmentalized. There would be time for processing emotions later. Now was the time for damage control and strategic response. I flew back to Portland the following morning, taking a direct flight that landed me at PDX by 10 a.m. The rideshare driver tried to make conversation, commenting on the unusually sunny October weather, but I responded with minimal politeness, my mind racing through contingency plans. As we pulled into my neighborhood, I scanned for unfamiliar vehicles. Jennifer's silver Audi was nowhere in sight, but there was a black BMW SUV I didn't recognize parked 2 houses down. New neighbors, perhaps, or surveillance. In my line of work, healthy paranoia is a professional asset. The house looked exactly as I had left it 3 weeks earlier. The fall wreath Jennifer had insisted on hanging still adorned the front door. The porch light was on, programmed to activate at dusk and deactivate at dawn. Everything appeared normal, which only heightened my unease. I entered the security code and stepped inside, immediately hit by the stale air and absence of the essential oil diffuser Jennifer ran constantly. The silence was oppressive. I did a systematic sweep of the house, room by room, noting what was missing. Jennifer's home office had been cleared out completely. Laptop, monitors, even the ergonomic chair I'd bought her last Christmas. Her walk-in closet was half empty, the expensive items gone, while cheaper pieces remained. In the master bathroom, her extensive skincare collection had vanished, leaving behind only basic items and empty spaces. The process was methodical, selective, the work of someone who had planned this exit carefully. In the kitchen, I found the first direct evidence of intrusion. The drawer where we kept important household documents, warranties, manuals, spare keys, had been rifled through. The spare key to my office building was missing, as was the key to our safe deposit box at Portland First National. I made a mental note to contact building security and the bank immediately. The safe in my home office appeared untouched, its electronic keypad showing no recent entries besides my own from before leaving for Seattle. Inside were my passport, birth certificate, and an external hard drive containing personal photos and documents. All present. Jennifer had her own copies of most important documents, so there would have been no need to access mine. Still, I changed the safe code as a precaution. As I completed my inventory, my phone buzzed. A text from David. "Checked your accounts like you asked. Multiple withdrawals from joint checking over last 3 weeks. Nothing touched from your personal. Call me." I stepped onto the back deck, where the neighbors couldn't overhear, and dialed David's number. "Tell me," I said, when he answered. "It's systematic," David replied, foregoing pleasantries. "Small withdrawals at first, between $2,000 and $4,000, mostly from ATMs, then larger ones directly from bank branches. $9,500 on the 3rd, $9,700 on the 7th, just under the reporting threshold. "Smart," I said, unsurprised. Jennifer had worked with enough wealthy clients to understand financial systems. Total damage? About $63,000 from checking, another $12,000 from the joint savings. plus the emergency fund transfer you already saw. That's approximately $162,000 total. I closed my eyes, calculating quickly. That's more than half our liquid domestic assets. Significantly more, David confirmed. I've documented everything for when you need it. How are you holding up? Functional, I replied, watching a squirrel navigate the fence line between our yard and the neighbors. Focused. Mike, David's voice softened slightly. At some point, you're going to have to process this. Later, I said firmly. Right now, I need clarity and strategy. I'm meeting with Sarah Chen at 2 p.m. about our investment accounts. Can you pull together documentation on the pattern of withdrawals? And I need the logs from the home security system for the past month. Already working on it, David assured me. And Mike, don't go into the office today. I've arranged for new security protocols and credential resets, but until that's complete, assume your work access is compromised. I hadn't even thought about my professional systems potentially being at risk. Jennifer knew enough about my work to understand what access could be valuable. The realization sent a chill through me. Thanks, I said. I'll work remotely until you give the all clear. After hanging up, I continued my systematic approach. I contacted Portland First National and had the safe deposit box access revoked for Jennifer. I called my credit card companies and had new cards issued. I changed passwords on every account I could think of, using a complex algorithm known only to me to generate unique credentials for each platform. Basic security hygiene, but crucial now. At 1:30 p.m., I drove to Sarah Chen's office in downtown Portland. The investment manager had handled our portfolio for 6 years and had become something of a friend in the process. Her office occupied the 14th floor of a gleaming tower overlooking the Willamette River, the walls adorned with abstract art and credentials from top financial institutions. Sarah greeted me with a concerned expression, ushering me into her private office rather than the usual conference room. Michael, she said as soon as the door closed, I tried calling you yesterday about unusual activity on your accounts. I know, I replied, taking a seat across from her desk. I've been monitoring the situation. Tell me what you're seeing from your end. Sarah pulled up our investment profile on her dual monitors, turning one so I could see. 3 weeks ago, Jennifer requested information about liquidating portions of your joint brokerage account. I explained the potential tax implications and suggested alternatives if they needed cash quickly. She said it was for a potential real estate opportunity that required liquid capital. And you had no reason to doubt her, I said. It wasn't a question. None, Sarah confirmed. She's been an authorized user on the account since inception, but then the request became more frequent. Small cells at first, then larger ones. When she asked about liquidating the tech-heavy portion of your portfolio, the stocks related to your industry that you've always managed personally, I thought it seemed out of character for your investment strategy. It was, I said. Those holdings are part of my professional research. I track companies in my space. Sarah nodded. That's why I tried calling you directly. Jennifer said you were busy with a major project launch, but had authorized everything. Something felt off. I implemented a 48-hour hold on major transactions, citing routine compliance procedures. That's when she stopped responding to my calls. I felt a surge of gratitude towards Sarah. Her professional instincts had potentially saved a significant portion of our investments. What's the current status of the accounts? Sarah clicked through several screens. She successfully liquidated approximately $47,000 worth of your more liquid investments. The remainder, about $315,000, is still intact but accessible to both of you. I can't legally freeze the accounts without a court order, but I can continue implementing administrative delays if there are additional unusual requests. I'll have my attorney contact you about that today, I said. "In the meantime, I'd like to document everything that's happened, including your professional observations about the pattern of activity." "Of course," Sarah agreed. "And Michael, I'm sorry about all this on a personal level." I nodded, not trusting myself to respond to the sympathy. Let's focus on securing what remains. Over the next 3 hours, Sarah and I meticulously documented every transaction, every communication with Jennifer, and every potential vulnerability in the remaining portfolio. We transferred my individually owned investments, primarily tech stocks and a small venture capital fund I'd joined through professional connections, to a completely separate account where Jennifer had never had access. For jointly owned assets, we implemented the strongest security protocols available without a court order, including dual authentication requirements for any transaction over $5,000. By the time I left Sarah's office, the immediate financial hemorrhaging had been contained. The damage was substantial, approximately $222,000 in liquid assets gone between the bank withdrawals, emergency fund transfer, and liquidated investments, but it could have been much worse without Sarah's vigilance and my own foresight in establishing the Cayman account. I drove straight from Sarah's office to the law firm David had recommended, arriving for my 5 p.m. appointment with Patricia Winters, a divorce attorney known for handling high-asset, high-complexity cases with technological elements. Her office was less ostentatious than Sarah's, with practical furnishings and walls lined with legal texts rather than artwork. Patricia was in her late 50s, with short silver hair and penetrating green eyes that missed nothing. She listened, without interruption, as I outlined the situation, taking occasional notes on a legal pad rather than a computer. "You've been remarkably methodical so far," she observed when I finished. "Most clients come to me in a much more reactive state." "My job requires me to respond to attacks systematically," I explained. "This is just another type of security." Patricia's expression suggested she saw through my professional detachment, but chose not to comment on it. "You mentioned an offshore account. Tell me about that." I explained the Cayman Islands account, its establishment during a legitimate business trip, its funding through portions of my consulting bonuses, its full reporting on our tax returns, and Jennifer's complete lack of awareness of its existence. "Is there any documentation connecting this account to your marital assets?" Patricia asked. "Joint tax filings where it's listed? Emails where you discussed it with your wife? Any paper trail showing commingling of funds?" "No," I said confidently. "I've maintained strict separation. The account is in my name only, funded directly from my consulting fees before they ever touched our joint accounts. I've filed the required FBR forms with the Treasury Department each year, but those were part of my individual disclosure requirements as a U.S. citizen with foreign accounts. Jennifer never handled our tax preparation." Patricia made a note. "That's potentially significant. Washington State, since that's where your wife filed, is a community property state. Typically, all income earned during marriage is considered community property regardless of whose name is on the account. However, there are exceptions when one party has systematically depleted community assets without consent." "Which is exactly what Jennifer has done," I pointed out. "Yes, and that works in our favor," Patricia agreed. "But don't underestimate the complexity here. The fact that you established this account without your wife's knowledge could be characterized by her attorney as an attempt to hide assets." I wasn't hiding assets," I stated firmly. "I was diversifying our financial security. The account was legally established, properly reported to tax authorities, and funded with income I earned. I simply never discussed it with Jennifer because she showed no interest in our financial planning beyond spending." Patricia gave me a measured look. "I believe you, Michael, but opposing counsel will attempt to paint a different picture. We need to be prepared for that narrative." For the next 2 hours, Patricia and I developed a comprehensive strategy. We would file a counter-petition in Oregon, arguing that since both our primary residence and my primary employment were based in Portland, the divorce should be adjudicated there rather than in Washington, where Jennifer had filed. We would document the pattern of asset depletion in excruciating detail. We would secure temporary orders protecting the remaining joint assets pending final distribution, and we would build a case for why the Cayman account should remain entirely mine, despite being established during the marriage. It was past 8 p.m. when I finally left Patricia's office with a clear action plan and the first sense of solid ground beneath my feet since seeing that banking notification. The next steps would be challenging but defined. In security terms, we had contained the breach and were now implementing countermeasures. I stopped for takeout on the way home, suddenly realizing I hadn't eaten since a hasty airport sandwich that morning. The house felt less oppressively empty when I returned, perhaps because I'd begun to reclaim it mentally as my space rather than ours. I ate at the kitchen counter, reviewing Patricia's initial documentation requirements and making lists of items to gather. My phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. We need to talk. This doesn't have to get ugly. Jay. I stared at the message, feeling a complex surge of emotions I hadn't allowed myself to process during the day's activities. Anger, certainly. Betrayal. A hollow ache where trust had been. But also, surprisingly, a kind of clarity. The Jennifer I thought I knew, the partner I'd built a life with for 11 years, had never really existed, or perhaps she had in the beginning, but had transformed into someone I didn't recognize. Either way, the message on my screen came from a stranger, regardless of the familiar initial at the end. I didn't respond. Instead, I blocked the number, finished my meal, and continued working through my checklist. Tomorrow would require more difficult steps. Tonight, I needed rest. Sleep proved elusive, despite my exhaustion. I lay awake, replaying moments from our marriage, searching for signs I might have missed, warnings I should have heeded sooner. There had been subtle shifts over the years. Jennifer's increasing dissatisfaction with our Portland life, her growing obsession with the trappings of wealth rather than the security it provided, her dismissal of my professional accomplishments, unless they came with immediate financial rewards. One conversation from about 2 years ago surfaced in my memory with particular clarity. We'd been at a dinner party hosted by one of Jennifer's marketing clients, a luxury real estate developer with a mansion in the West Hills. As we drove home, Jennifer had been unusually quiet. "Everything okay?" I'd asked. "Do you ever think about what our life could be like if you leveraged your skills differently?" She'd replied after a long pause. "Jason makes 7 figures selling luxury properties, and he doesn't know a tenth of what you know about system architecture." "I make well above industry average," I'd pointed out, confused by the comparison. "And I enjoy my work. But we could have so much more," she'd insisted. "A house like that. Vacations without checking account balances first. Freedom. We're building toward long-term security," I'd explained for what felt like the 100th time. "Following our 5-year plan." Jennifer had sighed. "Sometimes I think your 5-year plan is just an excuse to stay in your comfort zone." The conversation had ended there, but looking back, I could see it as an inflection point. Jennifer wasn't just expressing impatience with our financial timeline, she was revealing fundamentally different values. To her, wealth meant immediate consumption, showcasing success through possessions and experiences. To me, it meant freedom from uncertainty, protection against future contingencies, a foundation for eventual work-life balance. We had been speaking different languages all along, I realized, and somewhere along the way, Jennifer had decided to become fluent in someone else's dialect entirely. Dawn was breaking when I finally drifted into uneasy sleep, my mind still cataloguing. Moments that should have warned me the foundation of my marriage was cracking beneath the seemingly solid surface. I woke to my phone ringing at 7:30 a.m. David. "Morning," I answered groggily. "You need to see this," he said without preamble. "Sending you an email now, security footage from your house 2 weeks ago." I sat up, instantly alert, and opened my laptop. David's email contained a video file extracted from my home security system. The timestamp showed 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday when I'd been in Seattle. The footage showed Jennifer entering my home office with another person, a tall man with dark hair wearing an expensive-looking suit. Not Tyler Wilson, whom I would later learn was her boyfriend, but someone else entirely. They moved with purpose, Jennifer going directly to my desk while the man examined the bookshelves. She attempted to access my computer, growing visibly frustrated when the password failed. The man said something inaudible. The system recorded. Video but not audio, and Jennifer nodded. She then opened several desk drawers, removing folders and spreading papers across the desk surface. The man took photos of the documents with his phone while Jennifer continued searching. After approximately 7 minutes, they gathered the folders and left, with Jennifer carefully returning everything to its original position. If not for the security footage, I would never have known anyone had been in my office. "Who is he?" I asked David, who was still on the phone. "Working on that," David replied. "But based on the documents they were photographing, which appear to be your patent applications and licensing agreements, I'd guess someone with technical expertise who could evaluate the potential value of your intellectual property." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. This wasn't just about leaving me, was it? This was industrial espionage, using my personal life as the access point. "Looking that way," David confirmed grimly. "I've enhanced the images of the documents they photographed. They were primarily focused on your security protocol patents and the proprietary algorithms you developed for the financial sector. The stuff with the highest licensing potential." My mind raced through implications. Jennifer had access to my home, knew my general schedule, and understood enough about my work to identify valuable intellectual property. What she lacked was the technical expertise to exploit that information, which explained the man in the suit. "We need to identify him," I said, my voice hardening. "And we need to secure my intellectual property immediately. Contact my patent attorney. We may need to file injunctions." "Already on it," David assured me. "I've also alerted the security teams at your primary clients to watch for any unusual access attempts or inquiries about your systems." After hanging up, I forwarded the security footage to Patricia with a detailed explanation. This evidence transformed the narrative from a simple divorce with financial misconduct to something potentially criminal: theft of intellectual property and possible corporate espionage. The stakes had just increased dramatically. Patricia called back within 30 minutes. "This changes our approach," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger on my behalf. "I'm bringing in a colleague who specializes in intellectual property protection concurrent with divorce proceedings. And we're going to file for emergency orders today, freezing all accounts, preventing any use or disclosure of your intellectual property, and requiring immediate return of all documents and data." "What about the man in the video?" I asked. "I have a contact at the Portland Police Department's white-collar division," Patricia replied. "We'll file a report and provide the footage, but identification may take time unless he's already in their system." By noon, the legal machinery was in full motion. Patricia's team had filed emergency motions in both Oregon and Washington courts. David had implemented additional security protocols for all my client systems and professional assets. I had contacted every financial institution, investment platform, and property management company connected to our assets, documenting Jennifer's unauthorized access attempts and implementing whatever restrictions were possible without court orders. The situation was evolving from damage control to active countermeasures. I felt a strange, detached calm, the same state of focused clarity I experienced when handling major security breaches for clients. The personal betrayal remained a dull ache beneath the surface, but my primary concern now was protecting what remained of my assets and preventing further exploitation of my intellectual property. At 2 p.m., I received an unexpected call from a Portland area code I didn't recognize. "Is this Michael Thompson?" a female voice asked when I answered. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "Who's calling?" "My name is Vanessa Miller. I'm an associate at Westlake Partners. I believe you know one of our clients, Jennifer Thompson." Westlake Partners was one of Portland's most prestigious corporate law firms, specializing in mergers, acquisitions, and intellectual property. "I do know Jennifer," I confirmed, keeping my tone neutral while signaling to David, who was working at my dining room table, to record the call. "What is this regarding?" "Ms. Thompson has retained our services regarding some joint intellectual property matters," Vanessa explained in a carefully modulated professional tone. "We'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss amicable division of certain assets developed during your marriage." The audacity was breathtaking. After stealing financial assets and attempting to access my intellectual property through unauthorized means, Jennifer was now trying to claim legal rights to my patents and algorithms. "I'm afraid my schedule is quite full at the moment," I replied, matching her professional tone. "Additionally, any matters regarding marital assets are being handled through my divorce attorney, Patricia Winters at Winters Chen Lewis. I'd suggest you contact her directly." "Mr. Thompson," Vanessa's voice cooled several degrees, "it would be in everyone's best interest to resolve these matters informally. Ms. Thompson has been an integral part of your success, providing support that enabled your technical developments. Oregon courts have established precedent for recognizing such contributions in the division of intellectual property." "I appreciate your perspective," I said, struggling to maintain my composure. "However, as litigation has already commenced, regarding these matters, all communication should go through counsel. I'll have Ms. Winters expect your call." I ended the call before my anger could break through my professional veneer. "Unbelievable," David muttered, stopping the recording. "They're actually trying to claim your patents." "They're phishing," I said, thinking through the implications. "Jennifer knows my intellectual property is valuable, but she doesn't know exactly how valuable or which specific components matter most. They're hoping I'll panic and offer a settlement." "Classic intimidation tactic," David agreed. "But why?" "Westlake Partners. They're serious players, not the type to take speculative cases." The question lingered as we forwarded the call recording to Patricia and continued our security protocols. The answer came unexpectedly 3 hours later, when David's facial recognition search on the man from the security footage returned a match. "Got him," David announced, turning his laptop to show me. "Alexander Westlake, founding partner of Westlake Partners, and, this is where it gets interesting, board member of Sentinel Systems." Sentinel Systems, one of the largest competitors in my sector of the cybersecurity industry, a company that had tried to hire me 3 times over the past 5 years, each offer more generous than the last. A company that would benefit enormously from access to my proprietary algorithms and security protocols. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about Jennifer leaving me or taking her fair share of our assets. This was a coordinated effort to extract both financial assets and intellectual property, likely with promises of compensation far beyond what she could get through normal divorce proceedings. Whether Jennifer had initiated the connection with Westlake or they had approached her after identifying her as a potential access point to my work, the result was the same: a sophisticated attempt to leverage my personal life to gain competitive advantage. "We need to contact the FBI," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This crosses into federal territory, corporate espionage, potential wire fraud if they've transmitted my intellectual property." David nodded grimly. "I'll make the call. I still have contacts from my time consulting with them on cybersecurity protocols." As David stepped onto the deck to make the call, my phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number Jennifer had used yesterday, which I'd blocked but could still see notifications from. "Your lawyer contacted mine about emergency orders. Stop making this difficult, Michael. We both deserve a fair share of what we built together. Last chance to handle this reasonably before things get complicated. J." I stared at the message, a strange sense of clarity washing over me. Jennifer truly believed she was entitled to everything. The money she'd already taken, half of what remained, and now my intellectual property as well. In her mind, this wasn't theft but reclamation, not betrayal but justice. For the first time since receiving that initial banking notification, I felt something beyond anger or shock. I felt pity. Jennifer had chosen a path that might bring short-term financial gain, but would ultimately cost her far more in legal consequences, professional reputation, and personal integrity. And for what? A relationship with someone who saw her primarily as an access point to valuable information, a temporary influx of cash that would inevitably be consumed by legal fees and lifestyle inflation? I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I forwarded it to Patricia with a brief note about the Westlake connection David had discovered. Then I turned my attention back to protecting what mattered. Not just my financial assets, but the intellectual property I'd spent a career developing. Jennifer had underestimated both my preparation and my resolve. That miscalculation would prove costly for her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. As David returned from his call with the FBI contact, I felt the first stirrings of what might eventually become hope. Not for reconciliation, that bridge had been thoroughly incinerated, but for eventual recovery, for building something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but it was becoming clearer with each revelation. "They're interested," David announced, referring to the FBI, "especially given Westlake's connection to Sentinel systems. We have a meeting with an agent tomorrow morning." I nodded, mentally adding this development to the complex, evolving strategy we were implementing. One step at a time, contain the damage, collect evidence, build countermeasures, protect assets. The personal reckoning, the emotional aftermath, would come later. For now, I remained in operational mode, focused on the technical challenge, rather than the human betrayal at its core. That night, as I reviewed documentation for the FBI meeting, I came across our wedding photo album. In a drawer, I was searching for financial records. I paused, hand hovering over the embossed leather cover. For a moment I considered opening it, revisiting the images of a day that had seemed to promise a lifetime of partnership and trust. Instead, I closed the drawer without touching the album. Those memories belonged to a different reality, one that had perhaps never truly existed, except in my perception. The man I had been then, trusting, open, believing in the fundamental goodness of the woman who had pledged to share my life. That man was gone. In his place stood someone more cautious, more strategic, with boundaries forged from betrayal. I didn't yet know if this transformation was ultimately for better or worse. I only knew it was irreversible, like code that once compiled cannot be returned to its original state. The morning of our FBI meeting dawned with a clarity unusual for Portland in late October. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as I prepared coffee, my third cup already, though it was barely 7 a.m. Sleep had become a luxury I couldn't afford, my mind constantly processing new information and recalibrating strategy. David arrived at 7:30, looking more formal than his usual tech-casual attire in a charcoal suit and blue tie. "Ready for this?" he asked, accepting the coffee I offered. "As I'll ever be," I replied, straightening my own tie, a dark blue silk that Jennifer had given me 2 birthdays ago. I'd grabbed it without thinking, and now the irony wasn't lost on me. I was wearing a gift from the woman whose actions had necessitated this meeting. We arrived at the Portland Federal Building 15 minutes early, passing through security and being escorted to a conference room on the 7th floor. My attorney, Patricia, was already waiting, alongside a colleague she introduced as Marcus Jacobson, an intellectual property specialist who had previously worked with the Department of Justice on corporate espionage cases. "We've prepared comprehensive documentation," Patricia explained, sliding a folder across the table. "Timeline of events, financial records showing the pattern of asset depletion, security footage, and analysis of which proprietary information may have been compromised." The FBI agents arrived precisely at 9 a.m. Special Agent Elaine Harrington was a compact woman with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her colleague, Special Agent Terrence Washington, was younger and carried himself with the careful attention of someone who missed nothing. They introduced themselves without smiles, badges flashing briefly before being tucked away. "Mr. Thompson," Agent Harrington began after preliminaries were complete, "we appreciate you bringing this matter to our attention. To be clear, our interest is specifically in the potential corporate espionage and intellectual property theft aspects, not the divorce proceedings themselves." "I understand," I replied. "The personal situation is merely context for what I believe is a coordinated effort to access valuable proprietary technology." Agent Washington opened a laptop. "Walk us through the sequence of events as you understand them." For the next hour, I detailed everything, from the first subtle changes in Jennifer's behavior to the discovery of unauthorized access to my home office, the connection to Alexander Westlake and Sentinel Systems, and the attempt to claim rights to my intellectual property through the divorce proceedings. David supplemented with technical details about the security systems involved and the specific nature of the algorithms and protocols that appeared to be targeted. Agent Harrington took minimal notes, her focus completely on our words and expressions. Agent Washington typed continuously, occasionally asking for clarification on technical points. Neither gave any indication of their thoughts on the matter. "The timing is significant," Patricia added when I finished my account. "The acceleration of financial withdrawals coincided precisely with Mr. Thompson beginning work on a major security infrastructure project that would substantially increase the value of his existing intellectual property. Information about this project was contained in the documents photographed by Mr. Westlake." Agent Harrington nodded slightly. "And your wife would have been aware of this project's significance?" "Yes," I confirmed. "While Jennifer doesn't have technical expertise, she understood the business implications. This project represented a significant advancement in my security protocols, potentially the difference between licensing my technology to mid-level clients versus major financial institutions and government contractors, making it considerably more valuable to competitors," Agent Washington observed. "Exactly," David interjected. "Sentinel Systems has been trying to develop similar security architecture for years. Having access to Michael's algorithms would save them millions in R&D and give them immediate market advantage." Agent Harrington leaned forward slightly. What we need to determine is whether this is merely opportunistic, your wife taking advantage of her access to increase her divorce settlement, or if there was coordination with Sentinel systems from the beginning. The question hung in the air. One I'd been grappling with myself. Had Jennifer been approached by Sentinel after deciding to leave me, or had our entire relationship been compromised longer than I realized? I don't know, I admitted, but the security footage shows clear intent to access specific documents related to my most valuable intellectual property. And Jennifer's retaining of Westlake Partners, where Alexander Westlake is a founding partner, strongly suggests coordination. Agent Washington made a final note, then looked up. We'll need access to your complete security footage from the past 6 months, all communication records between you and your wife during that period, and detailed documentation of exactly which intellectual property may have been compromised. You'll have everything today, I promised. As the meeting concluded, Agent Harrington fixed me with a direct gaze. Mr. Thompson, I want to be clear about expectations. Corporate espionage investigations are complex and often lengthy. While we take your concerns seriously, we cannot guarantee immediate action against the parties involved. The standard for criminal prosecution is high. I understand, I said. I'm prepared for a long process. And one more thing, she added, her tone shifting slightly. Keep this investigation confidential. Continued interaction with your wife and her associates should appear normal from their perspective. If they suspect federal involvement, evidence could disappear very quickly. Patricia spoke up. That may be challenging, given the already contentious nature of the divorce proceedings and emergency motions we've filed. We're not suggesting you abandon necessary legal protections, Agent Washington clarified. Just that Mr. Thompson should avoid any direct confrontation about potential espionage or FBI involvement. I nodded my agreement. The strategy aligned with my natural inclination anyway. Contain information, observe patterns, gather intelligence before acting. The skills that made me effective in cybersecurity would serve me well in this personal security breach as well. As we left the federal building, David's phone buzzed with a notification. He checked it, then showed me the screen, an alert from one of the monitoring systems he'd installed on my professional networks. Someone had attempted to access my company's secure development server using credentials that, while valid, had triggered security protocols due to the unusual access location. IP address traces to a hotel in downtown Portland, David noted. The Grand Summit Hotel. I felt a cold certainty. That's where Jennifer said she was staying after moving out. David nodded grimly. The access attempt used your company VPN credentials, information that would have been in your home office. Documents. They're not sophisticated enough to bypass the location verification protocols, but they're definitely trying to access your systems. This was the confirmation we needed. Proof that the document theft wasn't just for divorce leverage, but part of an active attempt to access my company's proprietary technology. David immediately reported the access attempt to our security team and the FBI agents we'd just left, documenting every detail of the intrusion. By mid-afternoon, we had implemented enhanced security protocols across all my professional systems. Every access point was locked down with multi-factor authentication, biometric verification, and location-specific protocols. Any future attempts would not only fail, but would trigger immediate alerts and evidence capture. As David worked on securing the technical aspects, I met with Patricia and Marcus to develop the legal strategy. We gathered in Patricia's office, the walls now covered with timelines and connection maps detailing the relationships between Jennifer, Alexander Westlake, Sentinel Systems, and the various financial and intellectual property assets involved. The FBI involvement adds complexity, Patricia explained. They'll pursue their investigation independently, but we can leverage the existence of potential criminal activity in our approach to the divorce proceedings. Marcus nodded in agreement. The evidence of attempted intellectual property theft strengthens our position regarding asset division. Oregon courts are particularly responsive to evidence of bad faith actions by either party. What's our next move? I asked, studying the complex web of connections on the wall. We need to force their hand, Patricia said decisively. Right now, they believe they're operating from a position of strength. They've taken substantial financial assets. They have at least some of your intellectual property documentation, and they have Westlake's legal resources behind them. So, we make them realize their position isn't as strong as they think, I concluded. Exactly, Patricia confirmed. We file a comprehensive counter-petition in Oregon court, documenting the asset depletion in excruciating detail. We request emergency orders freezing all accounts Jennifer has accessed, and we include just enough about the security breach of your home office to make them nervous, without revealing the full extent of our evidence or the FBI involvement. Marcus added, simultaneously, I'll file intellectual property protection motions and send formal cease and desist notices to both Jennifer and Westlake partners regarding any use or disclosure of your proprietary information. The strategy was aggressive but measured, enough pressure to force a response without showing our full hand. If Jennifer and her associates believed we had solid evidence of their activities but weren't yet sure exactly how much we knew, they might make mistakes in their reaction. Over the next 2 days, the legal machinery engaged fully. Patricia filed our counter-petition, emergency motions, and financial disclosure demands. Marcus submitted intellectual property protection documents and formal notices to all potentially involved parties. David continued monitoring all security systems and documenting every attempted access or unusual activity. The response came faster than we anticipated. At 4:37 p.m. on Thursday, less than 48 hours after our legal filings, my phone rang with an unknown Seattle number. Michael Thompson, I answered neutrally. Mr. Thompson, this is Claire Bennett from Westlake Partners, a crisp female voice announced. I'm reaching out regarding the legal notices our firm received yesterday. Yes. I kept my response minimal, remembering Agent Harrington's advice to appear normal while revealing nothing. We believe there's been a significant misunderstanding, Claire continued. Our firm has no interest in your intellectual property rights, beyond ensuring fair distribution of marital assets. The cease and desist notices and allegations of improper access to proprietary information are concerning and, frankly, unwarranted. Is Alexander Westlake aware of your call? I asked, deliberately dropping the name to gauge her reaction. A brief pause. Mr. Westlake has recused himself from any matters involving your case due to potential conflicts of interest. I'm handling the matter personally under the supervision of our managing partner. Interesting. Westlake was distancing himself, either a prudent legal precaution or an attempt to sever visible connections now that scrutiny had increased. I see, I replied. Then you should direct all further communication to my attorneys. The evidence of improper access to my home office and attempts to access secure servers is well documented. I'm not interested in informal discussions at this point. Mr. Thompson, Claire's voice took on an edge of warning, litigation of this nature can become extraordinarily expensive and time-consuming for all parties. A reasonable settlement would be, as I said, I interrupted firmly, all communication should go through my attorneys. Good afternoon, Ms. Bennett. I ended the call and immediately relayed the conversation to Patricia, who found the timing significant. They're getting nervous, she concluded. The quick recusal of Westlake is particularly telling. They're trying to contain the situation before it escalates further. The next morning, Patricia called with unexpected news. Jennifer's attorney has reached out for settlement discussions. They're suddenly very eager to resolve matters quickly. "What are they offering?" I asked. "Nothing concrete yet," Patricia replied, "just expressing willingness to negotiate." But the tone has shifted dramatically from their previous aggressive stance. The pressure was working. Jennifer and her associates were realizing that their plan had encountered unexpected resistance. The question now was how far to push before considering settlement options. That decision became clearer that afternoon when David called with new information. "I've been following the money trail from Jennifer's withdrawals," he explained. "Most of it went to standard accounts, new checking and savings in her name only, cashier's checks, the usual divorce preparation. But there's an interesting pattern, with about $37,000 that moved through 3 different accounts before landing at a financial management firm called Meridian Partners." "What's significant about Meridian?" I asked. "It's a boutique investment firm that handles executive compensation packages for several tech companies," David explained, "including Sentinel Systems." The connection was becoming clearer, financial. Breadcrumbs leading from our joint accounts through Jennifer's personal finances, and ultimately connecting to the very competitor most interested in my intellectual property. "Can we document this definitively?" I asked, thinking of both the divorce proceedings and the FBI investigation. "I've already compiled the transaction records," David confirmed. "It's circumstantial but compelling when combined with everything else." I forwarded this information to both Patricia and Agent Harrington. The financial trail provided additional evidence of coordination between Jennifer Westlake and Sentinel Systems, not just opportunistic exploitation of our divorce, but a potentially orchestrated plan to access valuable intellectual property. The next day brought the first concrete settlement offer from Jennifer's legal team. Patricia forwarded it with her preliminary analysis. The terms were still heavily weighted in Jennifer's favor. She would keep the approximately $222,000 she'd already taken, plus 40% of the remaining joint assets in exchange for relinquishing any claim to the house, retirement accounts, or intellectual property. "It's an opening position," Patricia noted. "Not acceptable, but movement from their initial stance. More importantly, they've dropped all mention of your patents and proprietary technology." I studied the offer, calculating the financial implications. Jennifer would walk away with approximately $370,000 in liquid assets, more than her legal. Half when accounting for my separate property, and the Cayman account they still knew nothing about. But the removal of intellectual property claims was significant, an implicit acknowledgement that their strategy in that arena had failed. "Counter with this," I instructed Patricia after careful consideration. "She keeps $150,000 of what she's already taken. The remaining $72,000 comes back to joint assets for division. Standard 50-50 split of legitimate joint property. Complete confidentiality provisions regarding both my personal and professional information, and explicit acknowledgement that all intellectual property remains exclusively mine." Patricia's response was measured. "That's aggressive given current Washington state precedents on asset division. They're unlikely to accept." "I know," I replied, "but I want to establish our position clearly. I'm willing to be reasonable about financial assets, but I won't compromise on the intellectual property protections or confidentiality requirements." While the legal negotiations continued, the FBI investigation progressed in parallel. Agent Washington called to request additional documentation regarding my security protocols and specific details about which technologies would be most valuable to Sentinel Systems. I spent hours compiling technical specifications, market analyses, and competitive intelligence to support their investigation. A week after our initial meeting, Agent Harrington requested an update meeting. David and I met her at a coffee shop several miles from downtown, a deliberately casual setting chosen to avoid drawing attention. "We've made progress," she informed us quietly. "Financial records show payments from Sentinel Systems to a consulting company owned by Alexander Westlake's brother-in-law. Those payments increased significantly 3 months ago, around the time your wife's behavior began changing noticeably. That timing aligns with when I began developing the enhanced security protocols for the Seattle project," I noted. Agent Harrington nodded. "We're also tracking unusual communication patterns between several Sentinel executives and Westlake partners. Nothing explicitly incriminating in the content we can access legally, but the timing and frequency suggest coordination." "What happens next?" I asked. "We continue building our case," she replied. "Corporate espionage investigations are methodical by necessity. We need to establish not just opportunity and motive, but actual transfer and attempted use of protected intellectual property. The federal investigation would clearly be a long-term process, potentially taking months or even years to reach conclusion. My more immediate concern remained protecting my assets and resolving the divorce proceedings, with minimal further damage. The following day, Jennifer's attorneys rejected our counteroffer, as expected, but returned with terms closer to our position. The negotiation had begun in earnest, with each exchange moving the parties incrementally toward potential resolution. As the legal process continued, I maintained my focus on securing both personal and professional assets. I revised my will, updated beneficiary designations on all accounts and insurance policies, and documented every financial transaction meticulously. At David's urging, I also began sessions with Dr. Eleanor Park, a psychologist specializing in betrayal trauma and financial abuse. "You're handling the practical aspects admirably," David had observed, "but at some point you'll need to process the personal impact. Better to have support systems in place before that hits." I'd resisted initially, viewing therapy as a distraction from the immediate tactical challenges. But after the third consecutive night of stress-induced insomnia, I recognized the wisdom in David's suggestion. The betrayal had affected me more deeply than I'd been willing to acknowledge, and maintaining peak cognitive function required addressing both practical and emotional aspects of the situation. Dr. Park's approach was refreshingly direct. "You're compartmentalizing," she noted in our first session. "It's an effective short-term strategy for crisis management, but ultimately unsustainable. We need to develop integration techniques that allow you to process emotions without compromising your decision-making capacity." Over the following weeks, our sessions provided valuable structure for processing the complex emotions beneath. My carefully maintained exterior, the anger, certainly, but also grief for the relationship I'd believed in, shame at not recognizing the deception sooner, and fear about rebuilding trust in the future. "The most insidious aspect of betrayal," Dr. Park explained, "is how it retroactively alters your perception of shared history. You're not just losing the present relationship and future possibilities, you're questioning the authenticity of past experiences as well." That observation resonated deeply. I found myself revisiting memories from throughout our marriage, recontextualizing moments in light of current revelations. Had Jennifer been genuine during our early years together? Had there been authentic connection before something changed? Or had I been a convenient stepping stone in her agenda from the beginning? These questions had no definitive answers, but examining them in a structured therapeutic context helped me begin separating the practical challenges of the divorce from the emotional impact of the betrayal. I could proceed with necessary legal and financial protections while simultaneously developing healthier frameworks for processing the personal aspects. 4 weeks into the negotiations, we received a breakthrough offer from Jennifer's legal team. The terms were surprisingly reasonable. Jennifer would return $50,000 of the withdrawn funds, keep the remaining $172,000 she'd already taken, plus receive another $75,000 from remaining joint assets. All intellectual property and future income streams would remain exclusively mine. Complete confidentiality and non-disclosure provisions would apply to both parties regarding personal and professional information. Patricia called immediately after forwarding the offer. This is substantially better than standard divorce settlements in Washington. Something's changed their calculation. I considered the implications. The FBI must be making progress. They're trying to resolve the divorce quickly to limit exposure on the corporate espionage front. That's my assessment as well, Patricia agreed. The question is whether we accept or push for more favorable terms. I weighed the options carefully. The financial terms were reasonable, painful but not devastating. The intellectual property protections were comprehensive. Most importantly, accepting would provide clean resolution of the divorce aspect, allowing me to focus entirely on rebuilding while the FBI continued their separate investigation of the corporate espionage angle. Let's counter once more, I decided. Keep the intellectual property and confidentiality terms identical. On financials, she returns $65,000 instead of $50,000, keeps the rest of what she's taken, but receives only $50,000 additional from joint assets instead of $75,000. If they accept, we're done. Patricia agreed with the approach. One final push to establish that we're negotiating from strength, not desperation. I'll draft the response immediately. The counteroffer was delivered that afternoon. Jennifer's team requested 24 hours to consider, then accepted with minimal adjustments to the payment structure, but no substantive changes to the terms. We had reached agreement. The settlement was filed with the court the following day, accompanied by the necessary financial disclosures and asset division documentation. The judge, noting the comprehensive agreement and apparent resolution of previously contentious issues, expedited approval. Barring unexpected complications, the divorce would be finalized within 45 days. That evening, I sat on my deck watching the sunset over Portland, a glass of 18-year-old Macallan in hand, a bottle I'd been saving for a significant occasion, though I'd imagined something quite different than divorce settlement when I'd purchased it. The physical tension I'd carried for weeks had begun to ease, replaced by a strange mixture of relief and melancholy. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Congratulations on the settlement. First step toward rebuilding." I smiled slightly at his characterization. David was right. This was merely the first phase of a longer process. The divorce would soon be legally concluded, but the FBI investigation continued, and my own emotional recovery had barely begun. Still, I had protected what mattered most: my financial foundation and the intellectual property representing years of professional development. As darkness fell over the city, I found myself reflecting not on what I'd lost, but on what I'd learned. The experience had revealed vulnerabilities in how I approached both personal and professional security, areas where trust had created blind spots, where emotional connection had overridden rational assessment. Those lessons, while painfully acquired, would serve me well in rebuilding. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. The sender was unexpected: Jennifer Westgrove Marketing. Com. A new email address I didn't recognize, likely from her new employment. The subject line read simply, "Goodbye." I hesitated before opening it, unsure whether engaging with any direct communication from Jennifer was wise at this point. Curiosity ultimately won out. "Michael, I've accepted the settlement terms. You win, as you always do. I want you to know, this wasn't how I planned things. Circumstances changed, opportunities arose, and I made choices I can't undo. Maybe someday I'll explain properly, but for now, this is goodbye. I truly did love you once. J. The message triggered a complex swirl of emotions. Anger at her continued portrayal of herself as circumstantial victim rather than active architect of betrayal. Bitter amusement at her characterization of the settlement as my win, when she was walking away with substantial assets, and a hollow ache at the final line's implication that her love, however genuine initially, had been eventually superseded by other priorities. I didn't respond. The settlement included strict communication protocols. All future contact would go through attorneys until the divorce was finalized, and afterward, no contact would be necessary or expected. Jennifer's email violated those terms, but enforcement seemed pointless. We had reached resolution on the practical matters. Engaging on emotional aspects would serve no constructive purpose. Instead, I forwarded the email to Patricia with a brief note acknowledging receipt and confirming my intention not to respond. Then I returned to the deck, to the sunset, to the process of integrating this experience into my understanding of both myself and the world I navigated. The betrayal had been profound, the damage significant but contained. The rebuilding had already begun, securing assets, processing emotions, implementing new protections across both personal and professional domains. The path forward remained uncertain in its details, but clear in its direction. Forward with greater wisdom and more robust boundaries. As night settled fully over Portland, stars emerging in the clear autumn sky, I finished my whiskey and made a decision. Tomorrow, I would contact a real estate agent about listing the house. The space held too many memories, too many compromised security points, too much lingering energy from a relationship built on shifting foundations. It was time for new beginnings, a fresh space, reconfigured priorities, systems designed with both connection and protection in proper balance. The lesson of the offshore account wasn't just about financial prudence, it was about maintaining healthy separation between trust and vulnerability, between openness and security. Jennifer had emptied our emergency fund, believing she had claimed her victory. She never knew about the offshore account, the financial resource I'd established as contingency, yes, but also metaphor for the core self I'd maintained separate. From our marriage, the foundation that remained solid, even as shared structures collapsed. That foundation would now support whatever came next. A future I would build with clearer eyes, stronger boundaries, and wisdom earned through painful experience. Not the future I had once envisioned, but perhaps one ultimately more aligned with authentic values and priorities. The betrayal had taken much, but it had not, could not, take everything. The most essential resources remained intact: resilience, clarity, the capacity to begin again with greater understanding. In that knowledge lay the first real peace I'd felt since that fateful banking notification had illuminated the true nature of my marriage, and the woman I'd believed would stand beside me through anything. The real estate agent whistled softly as she walked through my house for the first time. Great bones, fantastic location, and those mountain views are to die for, she said, making notes on her tablet. Even in this market, we should be able to move this quickly at the right price point. Melissa Chen, no relation to my investment manager Sarah, had come highly recommended for her expertise in high-end Portland properties. In her early 40s, with an efficient manner and reputation for discretion, she was exactly what I needed for this transition. I'd like to minimize disruption, I explained. No open houses, only serious buyers with verified financing, and I'd prefer to be elsewhere during showings. Melissa nodded, understanding immediately. Divorce situation? Recently finalized. I confirmed. The court had processed our settlement with unexpected efficiency, the final decree arriving just 6 weeks after submission. The speed suggested either extraordinary administrative luck or, more likely, behind-the-scenes influence expediting the process. I suspected Alexander Westlake wanted all connections to Jennifer officially severed as quickly as possible. "I can work with that," Melissa assured me. "We'll do private showings by appointment only, comprehensive pre-screening of potential buyers, and I'll personally oversee every visit. We should list at $875,000, slightly above recent comps for the area, but justified by your renovations and the unobstructed view." The figure represented a substantial increase over our purchase price 6 years earlier, even accounting for the renovations we'd made. Jennifer had effectively forfeited approximately $300,000 in appreciation by relinquishing her claim to the property in the settlement. Further evidence that her priority had shifted from maximizing financial gain to rapid resolution. "That works," I agreed. "How soon can we list?" "Give me 3 days for professional photography and virtual tour creation," Melissa replied. "I'd also recommend minimal staging adjustments, depersonalizing the space while maintaining its appeal." Depersonalizing. The term struck me as both practically appropriate and metaphorically resonant. The house needed to be stripped of personal markers, family photos, distinctive art pieces, evidence of individual habitation, to appeal to potential buyers. Similarly, I needed to remove the emotional associations accumulated over years of marriage to move forward, effectively. I spent the weekend implementing Melissa's recommendations, removing photos, replacing personalized decor with neutral alternatives, reorganizing spaces to maximize perceived size and flow. The process proved unexpectedly therapeutic, each removed item representing another severed connection to the shared life that had dissolved so comprehensively. By Monday afternoon, the house was transformed, still recognizable as the space I'd inhabited for years, but subtly altered to present possibility rather than history. The professional photographer Melissa sent captured this new iteration perfectly, highlighting architectural features and natural light while minimizing specific identity markers. The listing went live on Thursday morning. By Friday evening, Melissa had scheduled 7 showings for the weekend, all with pre-qualified buyers. I arranged to stay at a downtown hotel during the showing windows, using the time to research potential new living arrangements. "The market's responding enthusiastically," Melissa reported Sunday evening. "We already have 3 interested parties discussing offers. I expect formal submissions by tomorrow afternoon." The speed was simultaneously gratifying and disorienting. I had anticipated weeks or months of gradual progression toward sale. Instead, the process had accelerated to blur. By Tuesday morning, I was reviewing 3 competing offers, all above asking price, with varying terms regarding closing timeline and contingencies. I selected the strongest overall package, a couple relocating from San Francisco for tech industry. Positions offering $892,000 with minimal contingencies and flexibility on closing dates. Their financing was solid, their enthusiasm for the property evident in the personal letter accompanying their offer. The knowledge that the house would become home to another tech industry couple beginning their Portland chapter together carried a certain symmetry that appealed to my sense of narrative resolution. With the home sale progressing smoothly, I turned attention to planning my next living situation. The proceeds would provide substantial capital for investment, but also opportunity to reconsider how and where I wanted to live. Portland had been our city, Jennifer's and mine, chosen together, experienced together. Did I want to remain in a place so thoroughly infused with memories of our shared life? I spent evenings researching alternatives. Seattle, where my company maintained significant operations. Austin, with its growing tech scene and different cultural landscape. Even international options like Vancouver or Lisbon, where technology, Professionals could establish flexible remote work arrangements with appropriate visas. Each possibility offered distinct advantages and challenges, practical and psychological. Seattle provided career continuity, but insufficient distance from Portland associations. Austin promised fresh context, but required building an entirely new professional and personal network. International locations offered the most comprehensive reset, but introduced significant logistical complexities. As I deliberated, Agent Harrington called with an unexpected update on the FBI investigation. "We've identified the full scope of the operation," she explained. "It's more extensive than initially apparent. Sentinel Systems has been using similar tactics with multiple technology professionals across the sector, identifying personal vulnerabilities, exploiting relationship access points, extracting valuable intellectual property through proxies." "Am I the only one who recognized and reported the pattern?" I asked, surprised. "The only one who documented it so comprehensively," she confirmed. "In most cases, the targets either never realized what happened or attributed intellectual property compromises to conventional corporate espionage rather than personal relationship exploitation. The information was simultaneously validating and disturbing. My suspicions had been correct. Jennifer's actions were part of a larger coordinated strategy rather than isolated opportunism, but the existence of other victims suggested a systematic operation targeting technology professionals through their personal relationships. "What's the status of the case?" I asked. "We're preparing to move forward with formal investigation of Sentinel Systems and several associated entities," Agent Harrington replied. "The U.S. Attorney's Office has expressed strong interest based on our preliminary findings. We'll need your continued cooperation, including potential testimony if the case proceeds to prosecution." "You'll have whatever you need," I assured her. "There's one more thing," she added. "Your ex-wife contacted us yesterday through her attorney, offering cooperation in exchange for consideration." The revelation landed like a physical blow. Jennifer was attempting to mitigate consequences by turning on her co-conspirators. Predictable yet still unsettling development. What kind of cooperation? Documentation of communications with Sentinel executives, testimony regarding recruitment and operational methods, information about other targets, Agent Harrington enumerated. "Potentially valuable, but we're approaching with appropriate skepticism. People in her position often oversell their knowledge to maximize benefit." "And the consideration she's seeking?" "Immunity from prosecution for her role," Agent Harrington replied. "The U.S. Attorney hasn't decided whether her potential contribution justifies that level of consideration. I processed this information carefully, examining my reaction. Surprisingly, I felt no strong impulse either way regarding Jennifer's potential immunity. The financial and emotional damage she had caused was already contained through the divorce settlement. Her legal consequences, or escape from them, seemed almost irrelevant to my ongoing recovery and rebuilding. "Whatever serves the larger investigation," I said finally. "My priority is stopping the systematic exploitation, not specific punishment for individuals." Agent Harrington seemed to approve of this perspective. "We'll keep you updated as the case develops. In the meantime, maintain your regular activities. The investigation remains confidential at this stage. The home sale closed with remarkable efficiency, the buyers eager to complete the transaction before their relocation date. 37 days after listing, I signed the final paperwork, transferring ownership of the property that had been the physical center of my marriage. The proceeds, after satisfying the remaining mortgage and covering associated costs, added $573,000 to my financial resources, a substantial foundation for whatever came next. That evening, I checked into the Nines Hotel in downtown Portland. having arranged month-to-month accommodations while finalizing longer-term plans. The contemporary luxury suite offered a complete contrast to the craftsman aesthetic of the house: sleek modernism rather than traditional warmth, city views rather than mountain vistas, transience rather than permanence. The shift felt appropriate, a physical manifestation of the psychological transition underway. I was between identities, between lives, no longer husband, not yet whatever would follow, no longer anchored to shared history, not yet rooted in new purpose. The hotel's elegant impersonality provided perfect context for this liminal phase. I continued working throughout this period, primarily remotely, with occasional visits to the Portland office. My company had been remarkably supportive once I disclosed the basics of the situation to my direct supervisor and HR representative. They implemented additional security protocols for my projects, adjusted travel expectations to accommodate legal proceedings, and offered resources for personal support during the transition. "Take whatever time you need," my supervisor had insisted during our initial conversation about the situation. "Your work quality remains exceptional, and we want to ensure you have appropriate space to handle personal matters." The professional stability provided crucial counterbalance to the personal upheaval, a domain where competence and contribution remained unchanged despite relationship dissolution. I threw myself into complex technical challenges, finding solace in the elegant certainty of well-designed systems and algorithms. 6 weeks after the house sale, I reached decision about my next steps. After considering numerous alternatives, I ultimately chose bifurcation rather than relocation. I would maintain professional presence in Portland, where my company's operations and my established professional network provided career continuity while establishing personal base elsewhere. The elsewhere crystallized during a weekend exploration trip to Oregon's coast. Driving along Highway 101, I discovered a small community south of Cannon Beach, less developed than the popular tourist areas, with dramatic ocean views and the particular peace that comes from proximity to natural power. A modern 3-bedroom house perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific caught my attention, its "For Sale" sign recently planted. The property was architecturally striking, glass and sustainable timber construction, maximizing ocean views while maintaining privacy, contemporary design, harmonizing with natural surroundings rather than competing with them. At $2 million, it represented significant investment, but remained well within my means, given the house sale proceeds, Cayman account, and ongoing income. Something about the location, removed from Portland associations, yet still within practical distance, connected to elemental forces larger than human concerns, resonated deeply. After thorough due diligence and careful financial analysis, I made an offer. The sellers accepted with minimal negotiation, and closing was scheduled for the following month. Simultaneously, I leased a small but well-appointed condo in Portland's Pearl District, creating dedicated space for work-related stays that wouldn't require hotel transients. The dual location approach would require careful logistics, but offered important psychological advantages: separation between professional and personal domains, physical distance from locations associated with my marriage, connection to natural environment that had always provided restoration. As these practical transitions progressed, I continued sessions with Dr. Park, working through the psychological dimensions of rebuilding after betrayal. Our conversations had evolved from immediate crisis management to deeper exploration of how the experience had changed my perspective and priorities. "What I keep coming back to," I explained during one particularly insightful session, "is the difference between trust and verification, or rather, the relationship between them. I trusted Jennifer completely, which created vulnerability when the trust was violated. But the issue wasn't trusting itself. It was trusting without appropriate verification systems. Dr. Park nodded thoughtfully. In cybersecurity terms, you implemented perimeter security without internal monitoring. Exactly, I agreed, appreciating her adoption of metaphors from my professional domain. I established trust at the beginning of the relationship, then treated it as permanently established rather than requiring ongoing verification. In my professional work, I'd never consider that adequate security architecture, yet I applied less rigorous standards to my personal life. How are you thinking about applying that insight moving forward? She asked. The question captured the essence of my ongoing psychological work, translating painful experience into constructive adjustment without overcorrection towards cynicism or isolation. Balance, I replied after careful consideration. In security design, we talk about defense in depth, multiple layers of protection rather than single points of failure. I think healthy relationships require similar architecture. Trust remains foundational, but verification provides supporting structure. Transparency becomes feature rather than bug. Dr. Park smiled slightly at my technical terminology. That approach allows for both connection and protection, a middle path between blind trust and paranoid verification. The offshore account was accidental wisdom, I reflected. I established it primarily for financial diversification, but it ultimately represented exactly that middle path, trust in our shared financial future with verification through personal protection. These psychological insights developed in parallel with practical rebuilding of my life infrastructure. By early spring, approximately 6 months after Jennifer's initial email, I had established functional new patterns. The coastal property had become my primary residence, a sanctuary where the constant sound of waves provided both white noise for concentration and reminder of continuity beyond human timeframes. The Portland condo served its purpose efficiently, providing professional space during necessary office days while minimizing emotional associations with the city. My financial situation had stabilized into new configuration. The divorce settlement, while costly, had left core assets intact. The house sale proceeds, combined with my existing investment portfolio and ongoing income, provided robust foundation for this next chapter. Working with Sarah Chen, I had implemented comprehensive financial security architecture, diversified investments across multiple platforms, modernized estate planning documents, systematic verification protocols for all accounts. Professional momentum continued uninterrupted, my work output actually increasing during this period of personal restructuring. The cognitive clarity that emerged from therapeutic processing combined with dedicated focus on controllable domains resulted in particularly productive phase. I completed a major security protocol enhancement ahead of schedule, initiated promising research direction for quantum-resistant encryption applications, and received recognition from industry peers. For recent publications, the FBI investigation progressed methodically in background. Agent Harrington provided periodic updates. Grand jury proceedings initiated, additional victims identified, corporate entities and individuals under intensifying scrutiny. Jennifer had indeed secured cooperation agreement, providing what Harrington described as useful but not game-changing information regarding Sentinel Systems operations. The case continues building, Harrington explained during our quarterly update call. These investigations move deliberately by necessity, but the direction remains promising. Your documentation remains central to establishing the pattern of activity. Personal rebuilding proved more challenging than professional or financial reconstruction. Despite therapeutic progress and practical stability, I found myself hesitant to establish new social connections beyond existing friendships. The vulnerability inherent in meaningful relationship formation triggered protective withdrawal, an understandable but ultimately limiting response to betrayal. Dr. Park recognized this pattern early. "Healing doesn't mean eliminating vulnerability," she observed. "It means developing discernment about when and how to be vulnerable while maintaining appropriate boundaries." Acting on this insight required deliberate effort against instinctive self-protection. I began small, accepting occasional social invitations from colleagues, participating in local business association events, joining professional development workshops that included collaborative elements. Nothing that demanded significant emotional exposure, but steps toward re-engaging with community beyond necessary transactions. The coastal property location initially complicated social connection, but ultimately provided unexpected opportunity. The small community included diverse residents, some retirees drawn by natural beauty, others remote professionals seeking work-life integration, artists inspired by dramatic landscapes, local business owners serving the modest tourist economy. Unlike Portland's tech-heavy social circles, this environment offered interactions uncomplicated by industry politics or status considerations. I established modest routines that created natural contact points: morning coffee at the local roastery, weekend farmers' market visits, occasional dinners at the surprisingly excellent seafood restaurant overlooking the harbor. Nothing forced or structured, simply presence in community spaces that allowed organic interaction development. One such routine led to significant connection. The coastal property, while architecturally striking, required substantial landscape management to prevent erosion on the cliff-facing portions. Seeking local expertise, I contacted recommended landscaping service specializing in coastal properties. The owner, Lauren Reyes, arrived personally for initial consultation. A woman approximately my age, with practical competence, direct communication style, and evident passion for indigenous plant ecosystems. "Your previous owners implemented exactly the wrong approach," she explained, walking the property perimeter with clipboard and evident disapproval. "Ornamental non-natives that require constant irrigation, creating soil instability. We need to transition to drought-tolerant indigenous species with root systems that actually prevent erosion rather than contributing to it." Her expertise and straightforward manner were refreshing after months of carefully diplomatic interactions with legal professionals and therapists. I found myself engaging beyond minimum necessary for the landscaping project, asking questions about coastal ecology and sustainable property management. Lauren responded with enthusiasm, uncomplicated by personal agenda or professional positioning. Most new coastal property owners want to impose their aesthetic rather than working with what belongs here, she observed. It's refreshing to find someone interested in appropriate solutions rather than forcing inappropriate preferences. The initial consultation extended to nearly 2 hours of wide-ranging discussion about ecological design principles, native plant communities, and responsible property stewardship. By its conclusion, I had not only commissioned comprehensive landscape renovation, but also found myself looking forward to the implementation process with unexpected enthusiasm. Over subsequent weeks, Lauren and her team transformed the property, surroundings from artificial ornamental arrangement to harmonious extension of native coastal ecosystem. The results were both aesthetically compelling and functionally superior, requiring less water, no chemical inputs, minimal maintenance, and providing substantially improved erosion control and wildlife habitat. Throughout the project, Lauren maintained professional focus while allowing natural conversation to develop during consultation visits. I learned she had transitioned from environmental science academic career to practical application through her landscaping business, seeking impact beyond theoretical research. She had been based in the coastal community for 7 years, building reputation for ecologically sound solutions to challenging oceanfront properties. "The theoretical work matters," she explained during one particularly interesting discussion about native pollinator support. But I needed to see tangible results, actual ecosystems improving because of informed intervention. Academic papers gather citations. This work creates immediate habitat. Her perspective resonated with my own experience balancing theoretical security architecture with practical implementation challenges. We discovered unexpected professional parallels despite working in seemingly unrelated domains, both translating complex systems, understanding into functional solutions, both navigating between ideal approaches and practical constraints. As the landscaping project neared completion, our interactions had evolved from strictly professional to something approaching friendship. Conversations extended beyond project requirements to include book recommendations, local community insights, and occasional debates about technology ethics or environmental policy. Nothing romantic or particularly personal, but genuine connection, based on mutual respect and shared intellectual engagement. The landscaping completion coincided with significant development in the FBI investigation. Agent Harrington called on a Wednesday morning, her typically measured tone carrying unusual urgency. "There's been a major breakthrough," she announced without preamble. "One of Sentinel's former executives has agreed to full cooperation in exchange for consideration. His testimony corroborates everything we suspected and provides critical documentation of systematic intellectual property theft operations targeting multiple technology professionals, including the connection to Jennifer," I asked. "Explicitly confirmed," Harrington replied. "According to this witness, Sentinel identified you as high-value target approximately 14 months ago based on your security protocol patents. They conducted comprehensive background research, identified your marriage as potential vulnerability, and made initial contact with your wife through industry event approximately 11 months ago. The timeline aligned with Jennifer's behavioral changes, confirming my suspicions about when the operation had begun, and Jennifer's level of involvement. Initially approached as unwitting access point, Harrington explained. The witness states they typically began by simply gathering information through social engineering, casual conversations about spouse's work, schedule patterns, home office setup. Once they identified her growing dissatisfaction with aspects of your marriage, they escalated to active recruitment, offering financial incentives for cooperation. The revelation provided context I had been missing. Jennifer hadn't initiated. The betrayal from nothing. She had been deliberately targeted, her existing frustrations identified and exploited by sophisticated operators. This didn't excuse her choices, but placed them within comprehensible psychological framework. The cooperating executive provided substantial documentation, Harrington continued. Emails, meeting notes, payment records. The U.S. Attorney's Office is proceeding with formal charges against Sentinel Systems as corporate entity and 7 individual executives, including Alexander Westlake. "What happens next?" I asked. "Grand jury indictments expected within weeks," she replied. "After that, standard criminal process, arraignments, discovery, potential trial, unless plea agreements are reached. You'll likely be called as witness. But most evidence now comes from internal documentation rather than relying primarily on your experience." The news represented major vindication, confirmation that my suspicions had been correct, that the betrayal extended beyond personal relationship breakdown to coordinated corporate espionage. Yet I felt surprisingly little satisfaction in this validation. The knowledge that Jennifer had been specifically targeted due to my work added uncomfortable layer of complexity to my understanding of our marriage dissolution. I shared this development with Dr. Park during our next session, exploring the implications for my ongoing psychological processing. "Does this new information change how you understand what happened?" she asked after I explained the FBI update. "It complicates the narrative," I acknowledged. Jennifer still made choices, multiple decision points where she could have taken different path, but knowing she was deliberately targeted, that professionals identified and exploited vulnerabilities in our relationship. It adds context I hadn't fully considered. Context without absolution, Dr. Park suggested. Exactly, I agreed. Understanding the external influences doesn't erase her agency, but it does make the situation less binary than I've been conceptualizing it. This nuanced perspective represented significant evolution from my initial protective absolutism, the natural tendency to categorize betrayal in stark terms of victim and perpetrator. Reality contained more complexity, more gradients of responsibility and circumstance than such binary framing allowed. "How does this affect your thinking about future relationships?" Dr. Park asked. The question touched central challenge I continued facing, balancing appropriate caution based on experience with openness to genuine connection. "I'm recognizing that total protection means total isolation," I said finally. "Security always involves trade-offs between protection and functionality. A completely secure system is one nobody can use." Dr. Park smiled at the technical metaphor, and a completely protected person is one nobody can reach. "The offshore account principle again," I noted. "Not blind trust or paranoid verification, but thoughtful balance between connection and protection." As if testing this evolving philosophy, I received unexpected invitation the following weekend. Lauren called regarding final landscape maintenance details, then added casual postscript. "Some friends are gathering for dinner at Tidal Basin Saturday, local seafood place I mentioned. Nothing formal, just good food and conversation. You'd be welcome to join if you're around." Nay, the invitation represented exactly the kind of normal social connection I had been gradually working toward. Neither completely anonymous nor intensely personal, shared activity with loosely connected individuals. Still, I felt immediate impulse toward protective decline. Dr. Park's words echoed. "Healing doesn't mean eliminating vulnerability. It means developing discernment about when and how to be vulnerable while maintaining appropriate boundaries." "That sounds enjoyable," I heard myself reply. "What time?" 7:30, Lauren said, sounding pleased. "Very casual. Just show up hungry." Saturday evening arrived with unexpected anticipation. Not anxiety exactly, but heightened awareness of deliberately choosing connection over protection. The restaurant occupied renovated boathouse overlooking small harbor, its interior warm with reclaimed wood and soft lighting. Lauren spotted me from corner table and waved me over to join diverse group, marine biology researcher from nearby. Research station, retired literature professor and his architect husband, owner of local bookstore, Lauren's business partner, specializing in hardscape design. Conversation flowed with remarkable ease, ranging from local development politics to favorite authors, sustainable fishing practices to architectural preservation challenges. No one asked pointed personal questions or seemed concerned with professional credentials or relationship status. Simply shared meal among people with common appreciation for place they inhabited. For the first time in many months, I experienced social interaction uncomplicated by trauma aftermath or professional positioning. Just present moment connection with interesting individuals without pressure or performance. By evening's end, I had exchanged contact information with the bookstore owner regarding upcoming author event and accepted tentative invitation to community shoreline cleanup the following month. Driving home along moonlit coastal highway, I realized something significant had shifted. The vulnerability protection balance I'd been theoretically considering had moved from abstract concept to lived experience. I had chosen deliberate engagement despite potential discomfort, and the result had been genuine connection rather than exploitation. One social evening didn't represent complete recovery, of course. The betrayal's impacts remained evident in heightened awareness of potential vulnerabilities, in careful assessment of disclosure boundaries, in strategic approach to trust development. But the experience demonstrated crucial distinction between protective awareness and protective isolation. The difference between security architecture that enabled connection versus preventing it entirely. The coastal house overlooking endless Pacific horizon had become physical manifestation of this evolving perspective, solid foundation with appropriate boundaries, yet open to surrounding beauty and possibility. Neither fortress nor exposed plain, but thoughtfully designed space-balancing protection with engagement. Jennifer had emptied our emergency fund, believing she had accessed our most important financial resource. She never knew about the offshore account, the prudent reserve that had protected core assets during relationship dissolution. But the most significant offshore account hadn't been financial at all, but psychological. The core self maintained separate from relationship identity, the essential resilience that relationship betrayal could damage but not destroy. That hidden reservoir of strength had sustained me through crisis and now supported rebuilding, not identical recreation of what existed before, but development of something potentially stronger, more balanced, with clearer understanding of both connections, value and vulnerabilities management. 18 months after discovering Jennifer's betrayal, I stood on the deck of my coastal home watching a spring storm roll in from the Pacific. The dark clouds gathered on the horizon, a spectacular display of nature's raw power contrasting with the unexpected calm I felt within. The federal case against Sentinel Systems had concluded 2 weeks earlier with a landmark settlement. 7 executives, including Alexander Westlake, had accepted plea deals with varying sentences. The company itself paid a $43 million fine and agreed to comprehensive compliance monitoring. My testimony had been brief but impactful, the documentation I'd gathered proving instrumental in establishing the pattern of intellectual property theft. Jennifer had avoided criminal charges through her cooperation agreement, though her professional reputation had suffered irreparable damage. According to David, who occasionally heard industry gossip, she'd relocated to Arizona and switched careers entirely, now working in real estate development. Tyler Wilson had faced minor charges for his peripheral involvement and received probation. They were no longer together. I received an unexpected portion of the settlement funds, $1, $2 million as compensation for attempted theft of intellectual property. The amount represented justice more than financial necessity, acknowledgement of the violation rather than essential recovery. I donated half to establish a foundation supporting education programs in cybersecurity ethics, converting damage into something constructive. My professional life had evolved in interesting directions. While maintaining my security consulting practice, I'd accepted an adjunct position at Oregon State University's Computer Science Department, teaching advanced courses in security architecture and ethical systems design. The combination of practical application and theoretical exploration provided satisfying balance, each domain enriching the other. The coastal property had become true sanctuary, professional workspace overlooking endless horizon, peaceful retreat from industry intensity, and increasingly place of connection. The native landscape Lauren had designed thrived through changing seasons, requiring minimal intervention while providing constant beauty and wildlife habitat. Lauren herself had become significant presence in my life. Our initial professional interaction had evolved gradually, first to friendship built on shared interests and values, then cautiously towards something deeper. We moved at deliberate pace, each of us bringing previous relationship experiences that counseled thoughtful progression rather than headlong enthusiasm. "You're thinking very loudly," Lauren observed, stepping onto the deck with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to me before joining my contemplation of the approaching storm. "Anniversary reflections?" She meant the divorce finalization, a date I'd mentioned offhand weeks earlier, without expecting her to remember. Her attentiveness to such details without making them weighted occasions was one of many qualities I'd come to appreciate. "Just taking inventory," I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Professional equilibrium, financial security, emotional health, all significantly better than I would have predicted 18 months ago." Lauren nodded, understanding my tendency towards systematic assessment. "The storm aftermath is where the most interesting growth happens," she said, gesturing toward the native grasses bending harmoniously with strengthening wind. "Systems designed with appropriate flexibility survive by adapting rather than breaking." The observation captured exactly what had developed through my recovery process. Not rigid fortification against potential hurt, but resilient adaptation capability. I'd rebuilt with deliberate attention to both security and growth potential, creating life architecture that could weather inevitable storms while remaining open to genuine connection. Dr. Park had helped me recognize the critical distinction between hypervigilance and healthy awareness, between isolation and appropriate boundaries. Our sessions had gradually reduced in frequency as I developed internal resources for continuing integration, though we still met monthly to maintain supportive connection during ongoing growth. "I received an interesting offer yesterday," I said, turning slightly toward Lauren. "Research fellowship at Cambridge for next spring semester, guest lecturer position in their advanced computing program focusing on emerging security challenges in quantum environments." "That sounds perfect for where your work is heading," Lauren replied thoughtfully. "How long would you be there?" 4 months, I answered. "I'd keep the Portland base in this place, of course, just temporary relocation for the specific project." Lauren was quiet for a moment, considering implications with characteristic thoroughness. "My business partner, Emma, has been wanting more operational responsibility," she said finally, "and the UK has fascinating ecological restoration projects I've followed for years. Might be interesting professional development opportunity." The suggestion hung between us. Not commitment, not pressure, simply acknowledgement of possibility, for shared experience while maintaining appropriate independence. Exactly the balanced approach we'd cultivated. "Something to consider," I agreed, matching her tone of thoughtful exploration rather than expectation. The storm's leading edge reached us then, first heavy raindrops creating concentric circles. In my coffee, we moved inside to the warmth of the main living area with its panoramic windows, still connected to the tempest's majesty but protected from its direct impact. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Life's storms remained inevitable. Relationship challenges, professional setbacks, unexpected disruptions beyond control. The difference now was conscious design of my response infrastructure. The internal and external resources maintained for resilience, the boundaries established not from fear, but from wisdom, the balanced perspective that allowed both protection and connection. Jennifer had emptied our emergency fund, but she could never access what truly mattered: the core values, earned wisdom, and capacity for authentic connection that constituted my most valuable assets. I'd rebuilt financially, professionally, and personally on stronger foundation. with clearer understanding of both vulnerability and resilience. As lightning illuminated the churning sea beyond our windows, I felt deep appreciation for everything. The difficult journey had ultimately provided not just recovery, but transformation, not just survival, but renewal with greater wisdom and purpose than before. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.